10. Crocodile selfies. In 2021, a tourist in the Philippines went to an amusement park with his family when he made the worst mistake of his life. He saw what he thought was a plastic model of a crocodile inside a lagoon. He didn't realize the crocodile was a very real animal. It just so happened to be sitting completely still, so still it looked fake. Not realizing what he was doing, the tourist, Nehemias Chapada, climbed into the animal's enclosure and posed next to the crocodile for selfies. He thought he was taking pictures with a statue until it lashed out and bit him. To make matters even worse, it was this guy's birthday, and he went to the Amaya View amusement park in Cagayan de Oro City just to celebrate. The 68-year-old man had his phone in one hand with his other dangling by his waist. The 12-foot, 3.6-meter crocodile grabbed the hand at his waist and dragged him into the water below. He was immediately torn apart as the crocodile ripped his flesh with its sharp teeth. He managed to get out of the animal's jaws and climb out of the enclosure with his limbs still intact, but he was bitten badly and had lost a lot of blood. He was taken to the hospital and has since blamed the amusement park for not having signs warning people to stay away from the crocodile and not to enter its cage. 9. The Vigilante family. In May 2021, a teenager and his family were charged with murder. Together, they committed a vigilante killing, gunning down their neighbor after mistaking him for a thief that had repeatedly destroyed their property. The neighbor was 29-year-old Eddie Clark. As he drove to his home in the Houston area of Texas, he was shot and killed by the family. He was a complete stranger to these neighbors, who paid so little attention to their own neighborhood that they didn't even recognize the man. According to the Harris County Sheriff's Office, Joe Argueta was the one who pulled the trigger and shot Eddie in the abdomen. They boxed Clark's vehicle into a corner in the subdivision, then opened fire. Clark hit the gas and tried to get away, but was already bleeding out, causing him to drive straight into a tree. The teenager's mum, Florinda, told investigators a person had been damaging their home and vehicles, and they thought the perpetrator drove a black Dodge Charger. When Clark tried to pull into his driveway in his Dodge Charger, they mistook him for the thief and killed him. The teen and his mother have been apprehended, but the father and uncle have since gone on the run. 8. Chad Gordon. Chad Gordon was only 27 years old when he was shot in the face on May 18, 2020. He was killed by a pair of gunmen that had the wrong address. They shot Chad on his own doorstep. Mason Sani Semedo and Cameron Robinson, the shooters, were sentenced to a minimum term of 29 years for murder. According to what the jurors were told in the trial, the men went to Chad's home in Wiltshire Garden on a stolen moped. They were armed with a 9mm handgun, knocked on Chad's door, and fired the second it was open, with no hesitation. Chad didn't even have a chance to defend himself or even understand what was happening. He opened the door and was shot in the face. This was a horrible tragedy for the community, not only because of the senseless violence, but because Chad was a beloved, kind person. He had autism, was a shy and quiet soul, and was described by those who knew him as a gentle giant and the last person someone would want to kill. The defendants intended to kill a totally different person and were trying to carry out a revenge hit on someone who tried to stab their friend 5 days before. When the sentences were passed down, the judge said the hurt caused by this evil murder was immeasurable. 7. DJ Jordi Latumahina. Jordi Latumahina was 31 years old on October 8, 2016, when he was shot to death in his car. He was sitting in a parking garage in Amsterdam with his girlfriend and their 2-year-old daughter. The killers had mistaken this man for someone else entirely. Latumahina lost his life in the shooting, while his girlfriend was hit by stray bullets and almost died with him. She was left with a lengthy rehabilitation therapy to use all her limbs again, but will be scarred and disabled for the rest of her life. In an interview, she said her body and her life have been destroyed, and that she misses Jordi every single day since he's been taken from her. She also says her daughter has developed panic attacks, which she assumes is from watching her father get gunned down right in front of her. Jordi was a popular DJ in Amsterdam and died from about 8 bullet wounds. In 2018, the men responsible for the murder stood trial in court. One of the shooters was acquitted, and sentences were given to the others. The man who pulled the trigger got 22 years and 11 months, while the getaway driver and another man involved were each given 20 years. It came out during the court proceedings that they mistook the DJ for a drug trafficker that lived in the same building and drove a similar vehicle. 6. 17 days in jail. Michael Lowe, an ordinary man from Arizona, is suing American Airlines after a case of negligence made him spend 17 days in jail after getting misidentified as a burglar. In 2020, Michael was at the Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport the same day as a man who stole something from a shop. Michael is an outdoorsman and career guide and happened to be on the same flight as the thief. Airport police were given a search warrant for the information of everyone on the flight, but some error by the airline system gave the cops Michael's information only, so he was issued an arrest warrant in Tarrant County. Fast forward a year later, Michael was arrested on July 4, 2021, while on vacation in New Mexico. The police were looking for a suspect in a local disturbance and ran Michael's name, finding out he had an open warrant. He was thrown into a jail, spending 8 days in prison before he could even see a magistrate, and then was denied bail on account of being a fugitive. He wasn't released for another 9 days after that. Michael never did anything wrong though, and was simply just a passenger on a flight. It was the airline that singled him out accidentally, resulting in him becoming an unknown fugitive. He's now trying to get some justice for the miserable ordeal, so hopefully they never made this mistake again. 5. Jill Dando. Jill Dando was an English journalist who spent most of her career at the BBC. On April 26, 1999, Jill was shot dead outside her home in London. Her death prompted the biggest murder investigation ever conducted by London's Metropolitan Police. It was also the biggest criminal investigation in English history since the Yorkshire Ripper back in 1981. A man by the name of Barry George was soon convicted of the murder and sent to prison, but after 8 years, he was acquitted following an appeal and a retrial. Then, in 2012, a Serbian warlord named Akran became the main suspect in the case, but he had already passed away. No other suspects were charged in the murder, and it goes unsolved to this day. Recent documents submitted to a court in Paris have suggested Jill's murder was actually a case of mistaken identity. These documents suggest the French fashion mogul Gerald Marie, a man currently being investigated for the brutal assaults of 11 women, hired a Russian hitman to murder another journalist. Lisa Bringworth had gone undercover to expose terrible crimes against women in the fashion industry for a series of hers in 1998. She herself was assaulted by Gerald Marie, only to be discouraged by the BBC from taking legal action against such an important man and prominent figure. Even so, she was kept in safe houses for years after the show was broadcast because the fashion mogul wanted revenge. There's now information that suggests he tried to have her killed by a ruthless Russian hitman, only to take out Jill Dando instead by accident. 4. Sharing a bad name. James Stopps of Lanarkshire in the UK had issues for almost 5 years just because of his name. James is a father of 2, an ordinary guy just trying to live life, but he shares a name with a convicted drunk driver. James Stocks, the guilty one, was jailed in 2017 after driving his car into a woman and leaving her with severe brain damage. Upon his arrest, police learned he was over double the legal alcohol limit and should not have been driving. It was actually his girlfriend in the passenger seat that was left fighting for her life instead of him. Ever since the incident, innocent James has lived a nightmare with people mistaking him for the criminal drunk driver. He's had to seek legal help since people have been sending threatening mail, his children have been harassed, and everyone in the small community recognizes the name of a maniac who nearly killed someone. In an interview, James said his life has been hell, and the people of Lanarkshire have treated him like a convicted murderer. Simply being given the same name as someone else has ruined James's life. 3. The Screwdriver Killer. On June 13, 2022, Randy Buchesny was at the Royal University Hospital in Saskatoon seeking medical care. He was in the cafeteria late at night when a man came up from behind and, totally unprovoked, stabbed a screwdriver straight through Randy's skull. It penetrated through the frontal lobe of his brain. Randy was 55 years old and had survived cancer twice. His attacker was identified as Kevin Wichakan, whose terrible assault landed Randy in the intensive care unit, almost killing him. And according to the Canadian police, it was probably a case of mistaken identity. Kevin had gone into the hospital to kill someone, saw Randy's bald head, and mistook him for his victim. Now, Kevin will most likely spend the rest of his life in jail, while Randy is stuck with no feeling on the left side of his body and major brain damage. He can't talk properly anymore, and doctors don't know if he'll ever recover enough to live a normal life. But even still, Randy is a survivor. 2. 33 years in prison. Edward Taylor was in prison for 33 years. He was charged with sexual assault back in 1986, but they got the wrong man. Edward didn't do it, but he spent 33 years paying for this crime. He wasn't granted parole until 2019 and was then fully exonerated. But he'd already spent more than half his life locked up behind bars and was almost 60 years old. The world had passed him by, and he didn't know what to do when he got out. 1 month after Edward was set free, he shot and killed someone. According to Edward's mum, Agnes Anderson, even though he was free from his suffering in prison, his trauma didn't let him go. He stopped going to therapy, was in major mental anguish, and somehow got a hold of a gun during this time. The police say Edward shot at a group of men from the window of his vehicle. The men fired back at him, and Edward got away. His bullet struck one of the men though and killed him, and now Edward is going back to jail and will probably never be let out again. As a side note, it was Edward's brother who actually committed the assault back in 1986 that caused Taylor to be in prison for 33 years. His own brother was the one who committed the crime and let Edward get locked up for his crime. 1 huge settlement. 2 police agencies in the United States are being forced to pay out a huge settlement after a major mistake landed a man in prison back in January 2020. It's a classic case of mistaken identity, but with a bizarre twist. The man who was sent to jail for 6 days was an individual of color, while the person who was supposed to be arrested was a white man over twice his age. And now, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department and the Henderson Police have to pay the wrongfully accused victim, Shane Lee Brown, $90,000. Shane was pulled over by Henderson Police for what he thought was an ordinary traffic stop. When officers ran his name, they came back with a felony warrant. The warrant was for a man with the same name, described as 50 years old and Caucasian. Shane is only 25 years old and black. Even still, the obvious discrepancies didn't stop police from arresting Shane and sending him to jail, and keeping him for almost a week. Once Shane got out, he immediately filed a federal lawsuit. Now he's getting a payout of $90,000, just short of the negligent actions cap in Nevada of $100,000, and he deserves every penny. Have you ever been mistaken as someone else? Let us know in the comments, and thanks for watching today's video. Be sure to hit subscribe and come back soon for more.